Welcome to the Inflection Podcast, where we explore the pivotal moments that have shaped us into who we are today. I am your host, Anabi, and I can't wait to dive into these moments with you. Let's get it. Welcome to another episode of the Inflection Podcast. Today, I have the unique pleasure of having Sandra Yang Scirpo with me, the owner of Y4 Consulting, a consulting firm that focuses on end-to-end strategy for the entities they work with. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Hello, Navy. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a minute since we connected. I know when we spoke the last time, I got really excited because you have a very unique journey and foray into entrepreneurship, going leadership, starting your own thing. And I'm mildly obsessed with the concept of inflection points and that journey that leads up to that. So let's peel it back a little bit for your own unique journey.
Sure. Do you want me to just maybe share a little bit about kind of the path so far?
Yeah.
Perfect. I will say, I don't feel my career path has been
Okay.
or straightforward in comparison to some. And oftentimes,
Surprise.
yeah. And there's times where I reflect and I go, wow, like how did I get here? Because I'll tell you a little bit about how I started. I started in supply chain management. Then I moved into business development, then client success management. And then from an industry perspective, it was aerospace, MarTech,
Wow.
cybersecurity, you know, and if you saw that on paper, or if I just said that, people would be like, how is that? What happened? Why? And I don't know why. Those were just in the moment areas that I had interest in and opportunities that came up along the way in the last couple of decades that I've been doing this. But what I have found is that all of those experiences culminate and they're all at the end of the day about relationship and people, right? Whether I was doing supply chain management or client management, it all has kind of these commonalities that I've been able to bring to it and to be able to amplify. I have found it unique because not everybody shares that's how their career path has been, but I think it's been an exciting one for me.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing that. That speaks to something that I have seen, right, again and again over the years. We go to school, the pathway that we typically are taught, right, as you grow up is more so linear.
Mhm.
You go to school for, and maybe especially older generations, you go to school for a specific thing, you graduate, you do that for 40 years and you retire. But in my own experience, anecdotal experience, and yours, right, there's a lot more to it than that. This is just one straight shot linear pathway. What is something for you though that has been helpful to make those pivots? So I could imagine you'd have to pivot quite a bit to learn, to upskill, and literally speak the lingo of every new industry or role you had to step into.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of self awareness that has to be involved in that whole process and that journey. 20 years ago, if you had asked me, I probably wouldn't have told you that I thought I was pretty self aware. I think looking back, certainly I was realizing that at each phase of that journey, that I needed something a little bit different or I wanted something a little bit different. And I'll give you a good example. When I started in the aerospace, I was just out of college. And when I got there, I quickly realized I'm like, this is not a great space for me. And mostly because the industry itself, if you think about it, it's engineering heavy, engineering based. 20 years
Yeah.
ago, you're this 20 something year old out of college and you're coming into that kind of space. It wasn't actually very welcoming, if you will, in terms of that. And I had my direct supervisor or boss or manager tell me that you're extremely ambitious, but you're going to be here for like 20 years. Take a moment here. Don't need to be in a rush to grow into. That's the worst thing that I thought I could hear because part of graduating college was like, you're just bright eyed and ready to like tackle challenges and you just want all of the opportunities because you're super excited. And to hear something like that also was an indicator for me of, oh, maybe this isn't the right environment for me because
Yeah.
it doesn't align with how I want to work. So I think there were those indicators, and I think I just had to listen to them to be able to say, Does this feel right? And if it didn't feel right, then I quickly made those changes and I quickly did pivot. And I was interested in lots of different areas. So it also lend itself to just being open to possibilities as they came about or seeking
Yeah.
the possibilities out. Yeah.
That reminds me of a book I came across during my old MBA experience in 2019, around 2019. And it's The Art of Possibility
Mm.
by Ben and Rosamund Zander. And that was very eye opening, just going through life with an expectation that there are possibilities. The world is teeming with possibilities. It really changes your posture, even in times of lack or creative juices are not flowing as much. But just that idea that there are possibilities out there to explore, I think it changes the dynamics of situations. And
Absolutely.
instead of this posture of cowering, it's one of, aha, I'm open.
I think 100%. I think to this day, I'm very much that person where I'm looking around and going, okay, I'm obviously trying to enjoy the moment because that's super important as well. But certainly, I think my nature is like, what else is out there? Like always being open and wanting to explore the possibilities. And I do think that's a benefit. I don't ever look at that as something that's a detriment or a negative.
Yeah. That leads me to something else that I'm fascinated by, and it's the interplay between the past, the present, and the future, and how those three things are always touching each other. It's a minute ago was just the
Yeah.
past, or a second ago, and now I'm in the present as we talk, and then the future is every moment that's just outside of our
Yeah.
reach, our
Absolutely.
perception of time. And it's very interesting because for those who are ambitious, it's very easy to be so forward looking and future oriented. And I struggle with this where you're you're dissatisfied with the status quo. That pushes you
Mhm.
the next thing. And then for some, the struggle is to be in the past, regret.
Yeah.
And some of us struggle with both. It's like okay, regret for the past and there's a future focus. But all of these are detriment for the present. So for
Yeah.
you, as you've taken on these roles and pivoted and learned a ton and grown, how have you balanced that out with
Yeah.
expectation of the future and pushing, but also staying grounded in the
Yeah.
present?
I think that's such a good question because even when I was just saying, I don't think it's a detriment, I think it's also been something I've had to learn to recognize the progress that you have made and then to go easy on yourself. And I think that certainly in my younger days, I think going easy on yourself just was not there. In the moment, I don't think I realized it if I had to be really self reflective. And I think it's taken probably the last decade of my life to really be able to stay still enough to go, you know what? You have accomplished a lot. And those, all the things that you've done, whether you thought it was a mistake or maybe you could have done better, all of those things, I try not to do regrets, right? Because I look at that and go, those are all, yeah, would I have liked a different outcome knowing what I know? Hindsight's 2020, great. But at the same time, all of those moments culminated to where I am now and where I'm going and my future is continue to shape based on what I'm able to narrate for myself. So I think that the future oriented nature that I have, I think has served me well. And that's what served me in the pivot points that I've had. But it's also recognizing that the past experience and the things that I've accumulated also allowed me to create those spaces and create those possibilities. So I do try to be mindful of being appreciative and also staying in the present and just being able to relax a little bit because that's also very difficult for some of us.
Yeah.
Just enjoy the moment because you're always thinking about what's next, what's next. So I do try to actively balance those out.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that. For the person out there who struggles with the same challenges, I'm sure that's helpful. Like it's definitely helpful to me. And it's something I've been grappling with too in the last few years. It is hard though. It's easier said than done. And it takes a lot of intentionality to really wrestle with that and make changes that are needed. You and I are both in the Arizona ecosystem, been
Yeah.
here for years. What are certain things in the ecosystem as or would you foresee, I should say, happening in the next 5 years, for example, X
Yeah,
amount of years?
yeah, absolutely. I think that I've seen so much growth in the last probably 5 years in Arizona. And I think had this conversation. One of the reason I was so interested in like the startup space within Arizona was because I've lived other places where there's so much excitement and different things that are happening from a startup perspective. And several years ago, when I got back into Arizona, I was very curious about what's the innovation in Arizona? What are we doing to support our community and growth? I've seen some really good things happen in the last 5 years. I think we've also, as a state, seen a lot of economic development. So if you think
Yeah.
about semiconductor space, the manufacturing of EVs in particular, that's moved into the Arizona region. I think the tech sector will continue to shape that landscape for us. I think those are all really strong opportunities there. The other opportunity, though, I would say that we have and we should be tapping into is we have several universities within our state and ASU, U of A, NAU, and a couple others. And I do think that we have the ability and we should be creating jobs that keep talent in the state. And 20 years ago, I will tell you, graduating college, those opportunities were rare. I will tell you that myself, my sibling, we all moved out of state because
Wow.
jobs elsewhere. And I do think that's changing, but probably not changing fast enough. So I have a personal interest in like how do we keep the talent in the state and continue to generate our economy. So I do think that's an untapped potential that we need to think about as a state.
100%. And even for me, in the past 10 years of being here and being involved in the tech slash startup scene, startup ecosystem, it's been huge seeing the evolution over time. More investments out here, more companies moving headquarters or at least a satellite office out here. So that has been really cool to see. The excitement is palpable just
Yeah.
from seeing the tide turning over the years.
Yeah, I hope to see more of that. I sit on some venture panels, and I will say that oftentimes I'm still a panelist who is a female and Asian in these rooms and still a minority. And I would love to see more of that. And the stats are that women founders aren't getting as much funding. I think it is changing, but it can change more. So I do look at that as an area within the state of Arizona. I hope to see more of that starting to change for the better and that there's more equity around that too.
That's a perfect segue because I was going to ask you, as a woman, Asian in tech and in positions of power over the years, I was curious, like, how that has looked like for you and what has shaped your leadership slash, business
Yeah.
acumen through that, because it's not easy to navigate being a minority in a space that is
Yeah.
dominated
My gosh,
by other groups.
I feel like even as a minority and as an immigrant, you already feel different as is.
Yeah.
And as I was saying, aerospace to MarTech to cybersecurity, when you go through these different industries and different companies, you start to realize kind of some of those nuances that exist. And I think that for me, certainly navigating those spaces, often feeling like I am the only, and oftentimes I was the only, created a level of empathy and self awareness, the ability to quickly read the room and as accurately as possible, I think became a skill set that I bring to the table. And how that shows up, I think, from a leadership perspective is if I have a team full of people or I do various meetings, I'll notice that some people are just not as comfortable speaking up in a larger group and or they're stylistically different or they have a different approach. And if I ever see someone who's very not saying much, for example, I will create that space to say, hey, I love to hear from you. Do you have a thought here? And just kind of leaving that space open for the person. And I think that's empathy and awareness of what's going on in the room. And I wish that when I was probably younger and a little bit more shy, I wish someone created that space for me. So I'm much more aware of those things in my leadership style now.
Yeah. And that is huge for the others, right? In those settings, that's a big deal. Having those who can spot them to say,
Mhm.
"Hey, I know you have a voice." For me, one of my bosses years ago did that because I enjoyed learning and doing research and stuff, but there was this imposter syndrome of
Yeah.
turning that into output because I feel like I spent so much time trying to perfect it because I was ashamed of what if this isn't good. But he really helped me navigate that by saying, hey, you have a voice, you have a unique voice, and I want to hear it from you. And that was very encouraging for
Yeah.
me to find my voice, but also have an advocate, who could help with that. And now as a leader and hiring folks, it's something that I don't always do well, but it's definitely more so top of mind as I
Yeah.
interact with
You know,
people.
I'm a strong believer that people will rise to the challenge and occasion. And let's say you are managing a team and you give somebody that opportunity. I think that they want to not only show up for you, but for themselves. Like they want to do. And I think
Mhm.
managers and people who have the opportunity to give someone that opportunity, I think you should. And if you were a manager and you gave someone that opportunity and they didn't show up, then I think that's a different conversation you can have with the person from a performance perspective. But I'm a
Yeah,
believer in people rise to the occasion.
absolutely. I think you touched on this briefly, but as you've gone through these roles, you've navigated complex environments. What are some resources that have been particularly helpful to you
Yeah.
to grow, support system, all that fun stuff?
Yeah. I love meeting people and just learning and growing and being able to stretch my mind, but also being able to bring people together. So, for example, a couple years ago, especially during the height of the pandemic and being locked down, I started to do a leadership roundtable and I brought people from all over the different industries to talk about leadership and success and various topics and specifically women in STEM and what are some of the challenges, et cetera, to loyalty and what are we seeing post pandemic. So I think that's a source of knowledge and a source of strength for me. I also have had the pleasure of going through the McKinsey Executive Leadership Program. So I still meet with a small subset of that group on a monthly basis. They're of doing a leadership through Harvard Business School, so we meet every probably 2 months, and I've met such amazing people, just global people from Dubai to the Netherlands, et cetera, and we all have different perspectives. And so I leverage those a lot because they're very smart people, and I'm always learning
Yeah.
from them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. What future tech trends are you excited about right now? You can't say AI. Okay, you can say that. What are some things that you're very excited about in regards to
I
tech?
won't use the word AI, but I'll tell you that I think how we do business from a predictive modeling and personalization perspective with the sheer amount of data that is available to us and how we use it responsibly is super exciting to me. And I look at those things from the lens of improving customer engagement and customer service and ultimately the business bottom line. So I think even at Y4 Consulting, that I'm looking at is the end to end. Like, how do you implement the strategy, but utilizing the three Ps, so your product, process, people, and how do you harness all of that to amplify success?
Yes, you said all the right keywords there for stuff that I'm passionate about with product, process, people. I
Yeah.
like that. I really like that.
You need all three to make it work.
Yeah, can just be, and many companies are as strong in one to the detriment of many of the other ones. It's I like to call it the trifecta. The
100%. What the three-legged
yeah,
stool. And I do think that many companies compromise for the bottom line from a short-term gains perspective, maybe compromising customer experience for the, hey, let's just push because we got to meet quotas. We got to meet these numbers, right? And ultimately, you do downgrade and deteriorate the long-term success and efficacy of your brand. And so I'm quite passionate about trying to balance all of those three.
yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. What advice would you give to a person, maybe a woman, who wants to rise up to the occasion with leadership or starting a business or something? But I think for a lot of people, the first step, this fear with launching, with making that leap, and there's a lot of uncertainties there. But from your own experience, rich experience, like what would you share to such a person?
I would say know your worth. I think that's the first and foremost thing. And I think in my younger days, I think I always valued myself, but maybe didn't always exercise that and advocate for myself. So I think know your worth so that you can speak from that place of value proposition for yourself and not from fear. And I also think that if you're afraid, it's okay. We all have doubts. We all face trying times and know that it's all normal, but don't drop out.
Hmm.
Continue that
I
path.
like that.
I'd say know your worth and don't drop out.
Know your worth. Don't drop that. I really like that. And the thing on fear, right? That was something we talked about quite a bit in my alt MBA program. And it was very eye opening because I had this perception that those who were brave and shaped things out and were productive had no fear. But
Mm,
then I got to learn, right? It wasn't necessarily the absence of fear, it was
mhm.
getting comfortable knowing that in spite of the fear, you still ship it, right?
Yeah,
In spite of the fear, you move forward. Now, over time, the more as you build the muscle of doing that, you feel the fear less and less. But some of the most prolific and the most successful amongst us are not necessarily totally devoid of fear, but they've just come to grips with, hey, yep, I feel the fear like everyone else, but in spite of it, I keep
yeah,
moving. I ship by default.
yeah. I completely agree with you. I think we get in our own way sometimes. And I think it is that mental state of don't let fear control you. But it's okay to fear because I think we all have that. It's an emotion. We need to be able to recognize it and then continue to move forward and just take that incremental step each day.
Yep. So, one last thing I got for you. When you're
Yeah.
not leading teams or building businesses, right? Or figuring out business strategy, what refuels your tank? How do you recharge?
Yeah, I've loved yoga for 20 years and hiking is something I love to do. So when the weather permits, I rather be outside. That is a way that I just unwind, clear my mind. Sometimes in that process, miraculously, I think lots of problems have even been solved by going for a long hike. So those are big things for me.
Amazing.
And then I think social gathering and travel. I love food. So I think getting together in a social setting with people and just having a good meal together is also a way that really just recharges me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Yeah, of
Appreciate
course.
you.
Thank you so much. This is fun. Thank you.
Awesome.